You're listening to the Midlife Marriage Mastery Podcast. Conversations for women ready to reimagine, revive, and reignite love in the second half of life. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here. I'm your host, Lisa Kneller, a marriage and relationship coach, helping women create conscious, connected, and joy-filled partnerships without losing themselves in the process. Each week, we'll explore the inner work of love, how to shift your being, master your mindset, and rebuild the intimacy and connection you crave. Because love doesn't fade in midlife, it evolves, and it begins with you. Welcome, everyone, to Midlife Marriage Mastery. I'm just going to let you know right off the bat, I'm coming off a 10-day cold, and my voice is really funky, but my guest is not, so it'll be a nice balance. But today I have a wonderful guest. Her name is Joree Rose, and before I start asking her questions, I want to read her bio that she gave me. She is a licensed massage. Oh, goodness.
I love getting massage. However, I don't think I'd be as good as giving it.
I think I need a massage, and that's why I said that.
There you go.
A licensed marriage and family therapist and relationship coach, mindfulness coach, author, and podcast host. She has helped thousands of people to live happier, oh my goodness, and more fulfilling lives through living with greater awareness and compassion, allowing them to decrease their stress, anxiety, and shed unhealthy habits, patterns, and mindsets. This is the work of a coach and a therapist. Joree recently sunsetted her podcast, Journey Forward with Joree Rose, after 254 episodes. That's a lot. And she currently co-hosts Love Isn't Enough with her husband, Dr. John Kneller, with whom she also does couples work. Joree has authored A Year of Gratitude, Daily Moments of Reflection, Grace and Thanks, as well as 2 mindfulness books, Squirmy Learns to Be Mindful and Mindfulness, It's Elementary. Joree has been featured in prominent media outlets such as OprahMag.com, NBCNews.com, Business Insider, KTLA News, and so many more. So to learn more about her or to work with her, visit JoreeRose.com. It's JoreeRose.com, or follow her on Instagram at Joree Rose. Welcome, Joree.
Hey, Lisa, thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here and definitely looking forward to our conversation.
This is so great. I'm going to tell everybody this is my first interview with a professional in the field of therapy, which I have been really looking forward to. And we do have some things in common. We're both coaches, but I wanted to tell you, Joree, that I listened to the last episode of your Journey Forward podcast, your reflections, and I skimmed over some of your more recent episodes and learned a few things rather quickly. And one is that you are very accomplished and you have a lot of skills and insight and helpful tools. And you have shared a lot of yourself over the years, with not just your podcast, but your books, your therapy practice, and your coaching. And after meeting you briefly and having that power meeting that we had in 10 minutes, I put LOL in my notes because I was like, that really was something. I never would have thought that you had feelings of diminished self-worth. So this revelation was surely a process for you, but it looks like you've come out on the other side. And I love that you even shared it. So do you want to say anything about that before
Oh my gosh. How long do we have again, Lisa? This is lifelong work, honestly. And as a therapist, I never believed in the philosophy of not sharing my whole self because I'm here to role model the tools that I teach. And I know, and research backs this up incredibly, that vulnerability breeds connection. And if I can't be authentic and share about my own journey, if I'm just teaching the tools and telling others how to go through it, there's no emotional authority in that. There's no relatability. There is no mirroring someone else's experience. And to be able to be a therapist, to be a coach and say, hey, look, I've not just been trained in this. I've not just been educated in the theories and in the practices. And I'm not just, you know, here to guide and teach you. I'm here to walk with you because you're not alone. And that to me is one of the most powerful things that we can do to create transformation is to feel safety in doing the work. So I have very vulnerably shared my story, but I'm also mindful of being honest without having to be fully transparent, right? Someone has to earn the right to the details, but when we can share the journey, emotions are human experience. And I guarantee our details are very different, but I guess there's so much that we have likely shared together. And that point of connection is going to make us feel safe and seen. And I mean, my journey has been ongoing from transgenerational trauma to enmeshed family systems to marrying my first husband after started dating him when I was 13 years old, got married at 24. I didn't know who I was. So in my early 30s, going through this awakening process to say, how did I get here? I don't know who I was, but I just kept doing what was next, what was next, what was next in the hopes that if I checked more boxes, I would feel fulfilled. And waking up one day in my early 30s and asking myself that question got me to slow down for the first time, delved into meditation and mindfulness, went down a very professional and personal path with that, and learned about who I was for the very first time. And then now that I'm married to John, he and I have been together for 10 years, have the relationship of my dreams, one that I literally manifested because I didn't know it was possible. I had no working models or role models to show that it was possible. And we also didn't have an easy journey. And in our podcast, Love Isn't Enough, and in our relationship work that we do with couples, he's a psychologist, as you said, a therapist. We are really vulnerable with our own relationship challenges. And can you imagine? We were together for 7 years, engaged, and went through a short breakup. During our breakup, Lisa, we had joint clients. Could you imagine your couples therapist go through a breakup? I mean, like, it was not only embarrassing, but super humbling. And our vulnerability, sharing our journey of what we were working through and how we got past it, is relationship gold. Because who actually gets in real time identification of, look, relationships are hard. It's why our brand is called Love Isn't Enough. You need
Yes,
love,
yes.
but it's not enough to get you through the hardships that are day to day or that are deeply rooted. Like for him and I, the majority of the stuff that was keeping us stuck came well before we even met each other.
Yeah.
And so, the more I can be vulnerable, I think helps give permission to my clients and to those who have listened to my podcast to feel safe to look at themselves. Because it's scary as hell to look at ourselves.
Oh, tell me about it. I mean, I've been married 40 years and oh, there were some big issues that came up in the last 3 years, a couple of different times. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm a marriage and relationship coach, and I'm having these issues even after all these years.
Yeah.
And and it's hard to talk about. It really is hard to talk about because you don't really want to open that up, but it is important to let people know that your situation isn't perfect. And my daughter's a therapist. She went through a divorce and she does marriage counseling also with a colleague of hers who she's a wonderful therapist and she
Mm-hmm.
struggles too. So like everybody does.
Well,
Everybody does.
and that's an interesting point you bring up. And I just want to name what we do in our profession does not necessarily translate as easily as one might think into our everyday personal lives. And that was something I have to, I get humbled in saying this because I really hurt John's feelings at times because I was so frustrated when I would say things like, but you teach this stuff. But like, this is what you teach men to do. Like, why can't you enact that? Well, because emotions aren't logical. They come from a different part of our brain. And when we have wounds or traumas that have gone unhealed, we developed adaptive strategies to deal with those wounds. And they're not always skillful, but they're self-protective.
Yeah.
And there's
Yeah.
strategies that we had in place that kept us surviving. And we don't always upgrade our operating system, is the language I'll use, to notice and identify and even increase awareness of those strategies and how deeply rooted they're based. And they're not necessarily in relation to what's happening right now in this moment. So I feel 10 times more authentic when I can be honest and say, yeah, here's where I've struggled. And if it looks perfect over here, let me show you everything that went into it. Because, and now John and I, we've been together 10 years. We just got married back in November after just 1 week shy or 10 days shy of being our 10-year anniversary. We have the relationship of my dreams, and I don't feel lucky. It's earned. We worked for this
Yeah.
every step of the way. And even through our short breakup, it was a wake up. It was an awakening of, let me be aware of the things I never thought I could grow and change and identify them and be committed to say, I don't want to lose you. I know that now for certain. And wherever you go, there
Yes.
you are. Your patterns are going to follow you. So it's not
Yeah.
just, some people might say, oh, well, this isn't the right relationship for me. Well, I can know when it's not the relationship. My ex-husband and I are actually great friends. He was one of 30 people at our wedding.
Oh, that's cool.
And
That's
that's an
cool.
awareness of, I didn't want him out of my life. He wasn't meant to be my partner forever.
Yeah.
And we don't always know how to work through these things. It takes an immense amount of courage. So if I can role model that, even in the slightest bit, then I feel really values driven in my work.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. That is truly a blessing for people to hear that who are confused and going through it themselves. I
Can I
think
name one
that,
more piece on that I think, just to
yeah,
add what you said? I
yeah.
think one of the challenges, and I've seen this for women in my career over the past 20 years, is women are socialized for being more relational, period.
Mm,
And women's awareness about their thoughts and emotions and experiences are more evolved than men's are. It's not men's fault, it's how men are socialized. And oftentimes in relationship, what I've seen is there's an imbalance of the awareness journey or the awakening to recognize, oh, this pattern is what's going on and it's not working for me anymore. And people always ask John and I individually and in our couples work, how do I know like if this is really a relationship worth fighting for?
mm.
And one of the answers that we always give is, if your partner is open to learning new relationship tools and skills. Some
Yes.
people aren't open to it at all. And
Yes. I've
that's going to
always,
be really, really, really hard to ever find the fulfillment, the satisfaction, the joint connection, the safety, the security. And I like to say, look, we love isn't enough. Like, we weren't raised, and many of us didn't have role models to know what it looks like to put it into action. But if you're open to learning, anything is possible.
oh, I love hearing that. And it's true. We don't get a manual once we get, when we get married. And I can't remember what else you said, but I'm going to get back to it because I have one of the questions I wanted to ask you had something to do with that. Like, I think it had to do with, learning at different paces or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think, I mean, I think one person can have a lot of power in the relationship, but I also believe what you said is there has to be receptivity on the other end. And if there is no receptivity, well, then, there you go. There's
It's good
not much.
information to have.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I look at my ex-husband. He and I went through 3 different couples therapists towards the end of our marriage. And the first one we went to was a man, and he was very, very honest. And he said, look, you guys were on a similar path of growth together. And then I started to just kind of awaken in my growth. And I started to just, I'm growing. And he looked to my husband and he said, if you don't grow with her, she's going to keep growing. And he was like, this is me, love me for me. And the therapist
Mm,
was like, okay, that's great. And if you
mhm.
don't keep growing, he kind of repeated it in 3 different or 4 different ways. And then he ultimately said, look, if you don't grow with her and you get divorced, any woman in her 40s that's going to meet you will have expected you done a little bit of this work. So you might as well try it now while you're married and you have your kids and all these. And he's like, this is me, love me for me. And it took me a long time to honor That wasn't him not choosing me. That wasn't him not loving me. That was his desire and capacity towards growth.
Mm.
And when I learned to depersonalize that, that was really helpful information. And I'm grateful because we all ended up where we're supposed to be. And you can't force somebody into growth and change. It's never going to be fulfilling if you're not on the same page about what you're working towards.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Um, I think what you and I have in common, besides being coaches, is that we both know that self-worth is the key to understanding your identity. And identity plus skills are what helps you create a solid relationship, right? And I am a big proponent of doing the discovery on this as the foundation of working with women who are struggling. And I have my own process and how I get people to dig into that. But tell us, how can women or men find out who they are outside of all of their roles in life? So the big question, who am I? Where do they start, Joree?
This is one of the things that stopped me in my tracks. And so I think everyone's journey can look a little bit different. I'm going to share what I did and how I've used my own journey as a base and what I've guided women to do. I have found that many women stay busy on purpose.
Yeah.
Yes, life is very busy, especially when we're mothers, especially when we've got young kids. And if we're building careers or even just being a stay-at-home mom like I was for many years, life is busy. And it's easy to use as an excuse for not knowing who you are because you're just doing what you've got to do. And yet I have found that it becomes a protective mechanism against not knowing ourselves because there's fear of what am I going to find under there? So for me, the very first thing when we ask ourselves the question is, who am I? I can't think of any better way to start than by slowing down. And for
Okay.
me, that was all about learning how to meditate. Now, I was
Mm.
someone who never slowed down in my life. I mean, honestly, Lisa, I was born in 11 minutes. My mom was in the delivery room with me for 11 minutes. I was almost born in the car. I started talking at a young age. I talk fast. Like the joke is I came out fast and I haven't stopped since. When I was guided in my first meditation, it was 10 minutes. I literally thought I was going to die. I had
I can
never had
imagine.
that much stillness and silence ever in my life. And it scared the hell out of me
Yeah.
because I was so conditioned and used to over identifying with my thoughts as my truth. That wasn't my reality though when I started to slow down. When I learned how to slow down intentionally on purpose with the intention of allowing what was ever arising inside of me to exist without judgment, it was like snow in a snow globe, right? All of it began to settle. And what I began to do for the very first time in my life was tune into my body, start to connect with my inner wisdom, my intuition, that gut response, which then gave me great dissonance because I was having an experience where I thought one thing, but I felt another. Well, which one did I pay attention to? What was the real truth? And the way I got to learn who I was through meditation and letting all of the minutia, all of the fears, all of the thoughts, all of the what ifs begin to just have space to settle, where I could then be aware of how do I actually feel? Back in the 70s, Carol Gilligan did research on girls and girls' socialization. And with, excuse me, girls around age 11 and 12, she asked the question, how do you feel? And what she learned in her research was that girls are socialized from a very young age to answer that question really uniquely. Do you want to know how I feel or do you want to know how I really feel? Because how I really feel may not be allowed because I've been raised to be sugar, spice, and everything nice. And I'm conditioned to be agreeable, to be kind, because if I'm not, I'm going to be considered a lot of other things. And so we learn relationally how to respond to how we feel. And it may not always be authentic. So to me, the beginning of anyone's journey is slowing down and just giving space for what's there, allowing reactivity. Okay, just notice that. Defensiveness, just notice that. Fears, just notice it. Just name it. When we name it, and research shows us as well, we have space for it to exist. We're not in the middle of it. So it's like we can see the forest for the trees for the first time. If we're so busy, we're not even paying attention, then we're just checking the boxes, going to what's next, what's next, what's next.
So with this slowing down and this meditation and everything settling, what then happens in terms of forming a different identity? In other
Well, to
words,
me,
where
you start getting curious as to why am I doing what I'm doing? What's my intention? Because we're likely on autopilot with a lot of it. What we say, what we do, how we act, how we respond, what we plan, what we believe in ourselves with. But with that slowing down, the greater self-awareness, we can become more intentional in our actions. And underneath that very tactical practice is values work. I guide clients in really uncovering what their core values are, because the core values are the guideposts for those actions. And when you're not being authentic, it doesn't feel good to you. When you have greater awareness of your core values, you realize, oh, I've just self-abandoned my values. No wonder I feel off. That doesn't feel good
mm,
to me. Once you have awareness of that, it's hard to unsee that. It's hard to unknow that. So it kind of becomes self-fulfilling and reinforcing in continuing that values-driven behavior. Because I got to a point in my own life where I'm like, oh, I've been self-abandoning for so long in favor of connection with others. I thought it was more important to stay connected than it was to be true to myself. That's how I was raised. That was how I was conditioned. That was what I thought relationships were. Didn't work for me once I
yeah.
became aware of it. When I understood my core values and saw that as really the North Star of my actions, even if it was super, super, super hard and I was values aligned, I was okay. So I was no longer self-abandoning. And I was able to make choices from that place.
Beautiful, beautiful. What I gathered from looking at your website is that you really do specialize in mindfulness and in meditation and practices like that. And I love that because I've taught yoga for over 20 years and have been practicing for longer. And I do have a meditation practice. Um, Terry Real, he talks about relational mindfulness,
I
which
actually
is,
interviewed him on my podcast.
oh my God. Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
go find that episode. Yeah, it was wonderful.
you have to tell me how to get him on mine. I don't know. That's a pretty big thing. Um, but he says it's the practice of catching yourself in reactive and triggered moments and consciously choosing connection over being right. And it involves moving from the wounded child, the reactive child, to the wise adult. And you know his stuff, right? Um, I have not personally been through a divorce, but I can tell you without a doubt that yoga and mindfulness definitely helped me in our marriage. My
Mm-hmm.
husband never practiced it ever, really. I mean, he says he's done some meditation, but I haven't seen him do it. Um, our marriage would not have gone as smoothly as it has without those
Mm-hmm.
practices. So, can you give us some examples of what you use in your own relationship that you share with your clients when
Yeah.
it comes to these things?
Yeah, I would love to. Let me first share how I define mindfulness, because I think sometimes people aren't really sure what that means in everyday practice. And so I define mindfulness in three ways: it's living with greater awareness, attention, and intention. So, what do we want to be aware of? Well, there's multiple things to be aware of, but internal awareness: what am I thinking, feeling, sensing in my body? And external awareness, which is what is my impact on others and what's going on in my environment around me. If I'm on an autopilot, I'm not paying attention to any of that, right? So you can't change what you're not aware of. So especially relationally, if you're stuck in patterns, you don't know what they are. You got to slow down to even acknowledge what the pattern is. That's not working. Otherwise, you're just going to be trying to do something different and not really sure what direction you're heading in. So once you have the awareness, it's paying attention. Okay, so what do we want to pay attention to? Our habits, our patterns, our mindsets, and our reactions. And then being intentional to respond and not react. So much easier said than done, which is
Yes.
why you need a meditation practice, which is the foundation to build the muscle. It's kind of like saying, I refer to meditation being like going to the gym and lifting weights, and mindfulness having the strength of the muscles to do what you want to do out in the world. You can't just sit at home and conceptualize lifting weights and then have stronger muscles to go do something different. You got to, it's, in neuroscience calls it experience dependent neuroplasticity. You got to do something different to build a new pathway in your brain. It's the same both relationally, individually, internally, and tangibly, right? So when we are more aware and mindful, in its most simple terms, we're able to respond and not react. We're able to stay present. In relationships, that's going to mostly look like non-defensive listening, extending deeper compassion, being able to stay self-regulated when you are getting overwhelmed and flooded, having that internal practice to be able to breathe, knowing when you breathe, you're going to calm your mind, calm your body. You're going to be able to access your executive functioning, because here's what people most don't understand about how the brain works. Our emotions are from our center part of our brain, and all of our executive functioning, which that part of our brain is not fully formed until our mid-20s, all of that is where our tools and resources reside, where we have logic, reason, rationality, decision-making, clear thinking, language, communication, memory. But the reciprocal relationship is when our emotions get activated, when that amygdala gets triggered. What normally might be the relationship between our emotional brain and executive functioning, if we're not triggered, that's like a 4-lane open highway with no traffic. You can easily access all those tools and resources. However, once you get triggered, that emotional brain shuts down the executive functioning. You just simply can't access it anymore. It's like trying to get on the Wi-Fi or try to get online when there's no Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
But you've got to quiet the emotional brain before you can access your tools. But think about relationships, how often we get triggered. Now we're just being reactive. We're not being skillful. We're not being able to use wise language. We're not being able to hear compassionately and open-mindedly. We're going to be defensive. We're going to shut down. We're going to get into very consistent patterns. Like John and I used to get stuck in the anxious avoidant trap, right? When we were both triggered, we had different strategies for how to repair and regulate and connect. He needed space. I needed connection. Opposite. It caused a problem. We had to understand the root of it. But until you can truly slow down, you don't have much of a chance of not being reactive or defensive. And then the second part of that is having the skill set on the repair when it becomes a challenge.
Yeah.
And the repair is the most important part, I find, because that's what not only is the healing aspect, but where we can come back together and to say, hey, I have awareness of what I said or did, how that impacted you, and I'm really sorry. And here's the action I'm going to take and continue to show you. Repair is never one and done in my mind. And in fact, I think the most effective repairs are when you continue to go back to the same thing, because John used to get frustrated with me. Like, we'd get disconnected. We'd have the repair. He'd say he's sorry. A day or two later, I'd be like, hey, love, I'm still feeling disconnected. And he'd be like, eye roll, sigh. I thought we talked about it. I thought we've dealt with it. And yes, we did. And I'm not feeling resolved or complete. And if I'm not resolved or complete, then we aren't resolved and complete. And he began to see that as great appreciation rather than frustration, because it takes great courage to go back to it. You don't want to rock the boat. And many people don't, because they're afraid of getting re-triggered. However, with greater distance from the incident, you have a lot more psychological safety to be objective and have clarity over, okay, so what was going on for you underneath this trigger? How did we get to that dynamic? And I'm like, let's learn and grow from this. What is the pattern that we saw that was consistent that we can now see with greater clarity when we're not so tied to the emotion? So that was a long answer to your question, but I think at the root of it is being able to slow down to get off of the habitual patterns of reactivity and defensiveness in couples.
Yes. And then there's the trauma piece too, right? Like, because if one or both partners have had trauma, and I think most people have. I mean, everybody
Well,
has a
enough
dysfunctional
lowercase
family.
t traumas lowercase t trauma can accumulate in the brain to feel the same experience as a capital T trauma. So I think we all have trauma. The degree to which we are aware of what it was and how it impacted us internally or relationally, that might take some understanding, but we've all had trauma. None of us get out of this life unscathed.
Yeah. Yeah. But you have to address that, right? Like that has to be addressed and worked on and worked through,
100%.
right?
And I think that awareness around your own trauma work, that's an individual process first. And then secondary to see how is it impacting the relationship and how is it impacting the relational patterns. So something really interesting is, as I mentioned, John and I would get stuck in that anxious avoidant dance. So during conflict, I would approach with anxiety, needing to stay connected because I got dysregulated. He needed space to regulate. I interpreted his space as abandonment. So I have some trauma from growing up in which I have some really deep abandonment wounds. And they weren't just anxieties, they were actual incidents. So it was very clear to me from a very young age, people can just leave. People can just die and leave. And that is a lot of the what was underlying my anxiety. There were times when I would get stuck in that anxious trap, that it wasn't just about the anxious avoidant dance. This was a trauma response for me. I was having this deep trauma response of a deep, irrational fear, but rational because of trauma, of being abandoned. And when I would sometimes escalate in that anxiety, at one point, John clued in of, oh shit, this is not just anxiety, this is a trauma response. And with that awareness, he tended to it with a different level of care because he saw his role in the possibility of helping heal that. When it was just the anxious part of that anxious avoidant dance, it was harder for him to get out of his own pattern of avoidance to step towards. So it was interesting when there were times it was clear I was having a deeper experience that was not logical and not rational, that was trauma informed. And we had to understand, oh, sometimes this is what's happening. And now let's look at that. And how do we go through the healing of my internal trauma as it was affecting our relational dynamics? And we did deep work around that.
Mm, very cool. Okay.
And the ultimate goal of any relationship, and what, a lot of trauma is going to affect our attachment styles, right? Those core wounds are usually attachment wounds at young ages or even previous relationships that impact our ability to not feel safe. And it's
Yeah.
very big, basic root. I mean, like, I don't want to undermine or dismiss anyone's trauma, but underneath that, that's what's showing up. And so therefore, the goal of any relationship is to develop a secure attachment. That's the relationship goal. When we have a secure attachment, we have safety, that we can get dysregulated, we can get disconnected. And I'm not fearful that you're going to leave me, or somewhere on the spectrum of I'm too much or I'm not enough.
Yeah. I look at the word love and I've sort of defined it for myself what that looks like, and safety is probably the first word, is what
Yeah.
that looks like. And that's what it's supposed to be when you're a kid. You're supposed to feel safe. I mean, I do a lot of babysitting for my grandchildren and I'm constantly making sure they're safe. I've got the older one and the younger one, and the younger one's the baby, and you got to make sure the baby's safe. And that's it. That's love,
And, and it's so easy, Lisa, for couples and adults to not understand what emotional safety is. Because yes, we want to keep the baby safe, but the emotional safety is where we don't understand where we've had traumas. So I can speak from personal experience. I didn't have emotional safety growing up because my emotions weren't acknowledged. What I felt was dismissed. So I didn't feel safe to express myself. It would be comments like, why are you thinking that? Well, that doesn't make any sense. We don't think that way, or my ex-husband, when I was 15 years old, he told me I was high maintenance and he was a low maintenance mechanic. That phrase haunted me for 30 years, thinking I'm too much. My emotions push people away. I'm not safe to express this need, this emotion, or this want because it's not going to matter. I'm too much. So the
Mm.
emotional safety is the validation of what you feel is real, valid, and true. No one has to agree with why you feel that way, but to be given the space to say, I see you, I
Yeah.
accept you. Like when John and I first started dating, he was over my house one day and he was feeling kind of down, was in an off mood. And as he was leaving, he was standing at my door and he's like, I'm really sorry. I have to apologize. I've been off today. And I looked at him square in the eyes and I said, you don't have to apologize. You've done nothing wrong. I accept all of you. His jaw opened. He'd never heard that before. And at that point, he was in his late 40s. And it took him about 8 years to believe that I actually meant it
Oh,
because
wow.
he had a lot of trauma of not being accepted. So, how could he trust me after 3 months in when other core people in his life didn't accept all of his emotions? That's part of the healing work. And now we have the emotional safety to say, you can feel what you feel, and I will still love you. I'm not going anywhere. I may not like it. I might need a boundary around it. We might have a disagreement because of it. And I accept you. I'm not going anywhere.
So I was going to ask you, how does someone gain emotional safety if there is none? And it sounds to me like awareness is one thing that you have to be aware of it, first of all. Then you have to have the intention, and then you have to have the practice or the skill of applying, what you know to be true. Like you've done nothing wrong, John. I will always, I'm here for you. Um,
Boundaries are in there. I mean,
okay.
these are very real conversations, but it's, for him to create emotional safety for me, he had to not be defensive when I shared how I felt.
Mm.
For him to not get defensive when I shared how I felt, if I said, hey, what you just said hurt my feelings, our old pattern would send him into a shame spiral because it disappointed. He hated disappointing me. So if I said, hey, what you just said or did hurt my feelings, rather than say, oh, wow, hon, I'm so sorry. Like, I didn't realize. What do you need? Come here, let me give you a hug. I'm so sorry. He couldn't do that at first because it triggered his shame of, I'm not enough. Look at that. I just hurt this person I love. So his shame spiral would cause him to get flooded. He would get defensive by explaining why he didn't mean to do anything wrong. And then he'd withdraw internally, which to me felt like abandonment. And he would have to talk to himself to get out of the whole, I'm just not good at this relationship thing. She's better off without me. I hurt people by just, and so we had to bring really clear awareness of the pattern. And that's hard to do because it's easy to get triggered by talking about these patterns, right? And so for him, he had to go do work with the shame. He did internal family systems work to understand what was that part of him that shut down when I said, you hurt my feelings. And he realized he was like an 8-year-old little boy from
Mm.
early experiences. So to do the healing work with that shame part of him, and then to practice the emotional regulation tools, the meditation, which he'd had a practice in, of coaching himself to breathe and stay calm and regulate his nervous system when I would criticize or give feedback or share how I felt. He would interpret it as criticism. I would just share how I'm feeling, right? The more regulated he could stay in his nervous system and breathe, the more he practiced understanding how shame used to take over. He then was able to hold space for my emotion in an entirely different way. And he wouldn't get defensive. And instead, do you know what he would say to me? Thank you so much for sharing how you feel. So when he was able to do his internal work around the shame and the flooding and the defensiveness, that gave me the safety to express myself without fear of rejection or judgment.
Mm.
Because I used to be in a pattern of why bother sharing how I feel? It's just going to make him withdraw. It's not that big of a deal. But guess what? It is a big deal
Yeah.
because I was self abandoning in favor of connection by not being authentic with how I felt.
Well, but here's what I want to address there, and I wonder, how much work you've done with this. So I always think of hurt feelings as your feelings come from your thoughts about the circumstance, whatever it is he said, whatever it is he did, and it was a circumstance. It's what to me is kind of neutral, but then you have thoughts about, was he just being insensitive? What is this something that really hurt me, or is there a way to get clarity about what he said? You know what I'm saying? Like, how much are we responsible for our hurt feelings? I guess is what I'm asking. I get the part where he needed, that was an opportunity for growth for him.
Mm-hmm.
And also, where's the opportunity for growth for the person feeling the big emotions?
A lot of growth. I think it's my work, his work, our work. I think, and we've delved into all three of those. One cannot be done in isolation. Part of my work there was understanding what is the root of my deep sensitivity and what can I do to heal that inner wound of my own. So that was my own self-worth work.
Mm, yeah.
Right. And so part of that is, I mean, therapy, there's a variety of different methodologies that we went through to both of us understand what it was our core wound
Mm-hmm.
and what can I do. One of the phrases I often say, Lisa, is you can't receive what you don't believe. And so if he would
Mm,
have said, or just like what I said to him, I accept all of you, it took him a long time to believe it because he didn't believe that in himself. That was his work to have the self-worth to believe I accept you. Same for me, right? And so the way that I did that work is loving kindness practice.
oh.
Every single day for years, I offered messages of loving kindness to myself. And when I first was learning mindfulness and meditation, and I would have a daily practice, I would start with the pretty traditional words of loving kindness of may I be happy, may I be healthy, may I be at ease, may I be at peace. And then I thought, okay, well, those are lovely, but like, what do I actually need? I was in my mid 30s going through divorce, had never been alone. Like, I needed a lot of things. Like, what did I actually need to offer myself? And the words that came to me were, may I be strong and confident. May I be capable. May I be happy. May I be fulfilled. And I gave those messages to myself every single morning in my daily practice. And I remember one day after years being in my therapist's office and just in everyday conversation with them, out of my mouth came the words where I was strong, confident, and capable.
Mm.
I had to offer myself, that's the inner parenting work, right? That's the healing our inner child. It's offering to yourself what you didn't get because you believe you're worthy of receiving it.
It's so interesting you say that because what hit me was just like creating a daily habit. Like don't let that go because I was just a friend of mine was just um, counseling me today about, developing strong habits, mental habits, and that takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of digging. It takes, writing things down and looking at your belief systems and looking at your thoughts and then deciding, what is it that I really want and what emotional state do I need to be in? And so that practice that you just shared is so powerful, and it's even more powerful if you're doing it every single day, because then you're reprogramming your brain. Those are new neural pathways, right, that you're creating,
Yeah.
and it makes such a huge difference.
Well,
Wow.
and to be able to also then do relational habits. And one of the things that John and I do, and I would say, we've been back together from our breakup for 3 years. And like I said, we just got married 4 months ago. So we're very secure. Our emotional safety has never been stronger. And we're so proud of the work that we did. So some of these habits are not as strong as they were in the beginning when we were going through a lot of that healing work. And this is what we tell all of our clients that we work with is you've got to do a weekly check-in with your partner because, we're on autopilot. We're busy. We're going through the motions. We're taking care of the kids, the job, the house, the dog, all of the things, right? And
Yes.
it's really easy to say, you're my most important person. And yet I'm also not giving you the time, energy, and attention that would reflect you're my most important person. So we need to schedule check ins for one another. And the check in that we offer to couples is super simple, but profound. It's 2 questions. What did I do to make you feel loved this week? And what could I have done to make you feel more loved? Now, the
Oh,
powerful part of these
like that.
questions is it's simply an opportunity to check in and answer the question. It's not about going into the whole story of you didn't make me feel loved. You did this, you did that. If only, but it's not about that. We're creating safety for a check in first. And when we give ourselves weekly check ins, we don't let time to things for resentment to build. Resentment is a killer of relationships. Terry Real says marriage, divorces marriages end by death of 1,000 paper cuts, not by big transgressions. And those paper cuts, when go unacknowledged, build into big resentments. And so
Yeah.
these check-ins are powerful. Now, the way that we can create emotional safety with these check-ins is, so when someone says, it would have made me feel more loved this week if you would have whatever small little thing would have felt more
Put your
loving.
arm around me,
Right.
yeah, something
Or
little.
looked up from your phone when I walked in the door.
Yeah. Yeah.
The way to receive that, to create emotional safety and to allow the safety for these check-ins to continue, is for the partner to simply say, thank you for sharing. And then you schedule a time to talk about it later. And because you scheduled time to talk about it, now you're tapping into some of the skills the Gottmans talk about of the softened startup, where we're now setting a time aside where we're both aware of what we want to talk about, so we're prepared for it. So these check-ins are so beautiful and profound and simple and hard, because it's not how we're conditioned to work with our partners.
Not at all. I mean, it's almost awkward. Like in the beginning, it would be awkward to hear a question like that when you're not used to hearing a question like that.
Well,
So,
and I'm also looking for ways to create greater intimacy. And to me, intimacy is vulnerability. It's not necessarily sexual. And when we have greater emotional safety, we're allowed, and I say that in air quotes to those listening, like, we feel more allowed to be more vulnerable. And intimacy is sharing your inner world. Like, what is more vulnerable than sharing your inner world? And so I often will talk to couples about how to have non-sexual physical touch as a way to build emotional safety if there's been disconnection. And one of my favorite ways to do that is through a gratitude massage.
mm-hmm.
And you can do this clothed or not clothed, but start with one person lying face down, the other one starting to give a back massage. And while massaging your partner, say what you're grateful for about them. And as you receive the physical touch and the massage, to receive and take in the gratitude your partner has for you. Now, if you're feeling disconnected, this is going to be way too far away from where you're at in emotional safety to delve into a gratitude massage. But it's a beautiful practice to build, to pair the non-sexual or sexual physical touch with gratitude and practice receiving that. Because again, if we don't believe the things our partner is saying, we're not going to take it in. If we don't believe it about ourselves, we're going to dismiss what they say. So very simple, but really profound partner practices.
Yeah, I will say that my husband and I are pretty good at it, but I will also say that I am way better at it. And that's why I think that, even if a woman gets new ideas,
Sure.
to spark up the relationship. I'll just give you one example. So last night, I was taking some garbage out to the curb and it was dark. There's lots of lights in the neighborhood and it's very safe here. But I said to my husband, would you come out with me or stay by the door while I go do this outside? And he loves to protect me. So he came outside with me. I put the garbage in and then we came in the house and I shut the door and I said, thank you for always protecting me.
Mhm.
And he said, you're welcome. And he loves to be acknowledged for things like
Yeah.
that. So that's just one idea. I have lots
Well,
of
and
ideas,
yeah,
but
and the gratitude, I mean, the Gottmans recently changed their research. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but with their new book
no.
that came out a couple years ago called Fight Right, it's a phenomenal book. So the Gottmans are
Mm,
the preeminent researchers on marriage and couples, right? They've been scientifically studying for 40 years. And it used to be that they had a ratio of 5-to-1 positive to negatives that you were supposed to work for to be what they call a master versus disasters in relationship. So 5-to-1 positives to negatives. So for every one negative incident, you have 5 positives. It puts drops in the emotional bucket. So when there's inevitable withdrawals, you still have more left over. Current research of theirs changed.
interesting.
The goal of that positive to negative ratio is no longer 5-to-1, it is 20-to-1.
Wow,
20
really?
to 1, and they actually say 5-to-1 during conflict. I mean, okay, so that's like when you're disconnected in an argument, you're still supposed to have 5-to-1 positive to negative comments in conflict. What would that sound like in conflict? Thank you for listening. Thank you for hearing what I just said. Thank you for not being defensive. That's what it sounds like in conflict. John and I are really good at the 20, I mean, we probably hit more than that a day, to be honest. And we get a lot of, kind of like the eye rolls from either my daughter. There was one time recently, he's gone blind in his eye. He has since gotten his vision back. It's been a whole process and journey. But during all of that, he wasn't doing any of the driving. And so my aunt and uncle were here visiting, and we are getting in the car. And like he always would do, he would say, "Thank you for driving." Well, my response to him thanking me for driving, I would jokingly say, "Thank you for not driving." And then we would go back and forth. And my aunt and uncle are literally in the backseat, and they're like, "Are you guys actually like kidding me right now?" And my daughter is like, "Nope, this is what they're like." So,
well, and isn't that beautiful that you're modeling that for your daughter?
100%, 100%.
That's cool.
I told you
love
we
that.
could talk for a long time, Lisa.
I'm telling you, and you probably have a session coming up.
I do actually in 5 minutes.
So just tell us where we can find you. And thank you so much. I'm going to just say thank you right now so I don't forget.
Oh, wonderful.
But this has been so much fun. And yes, there were several topics I thought, oh my gosh, we could really dig into that. Where can people find you?
Yeah. So for my own individual work, as you mentioned in the intro, joreerose.com. That's JOREEROSE.com. I'm doing some new exciting work with women that is just unfolding. So stay tuned for all that's there, creating an online and in-person community for women to be in real conversation with each other. Because it's so hard to actually acknowledge what we really feel and to feel safe and heard. And for any of the relationship work, it's loveisn'tenough.net. For any of the work with John and I, we are working on a book right now. We are going to end up leading relationships retreats probably in the next year or so. I have a women's retreat coming up in October in Palm Springs that I just booked. Wonderful. So, and John and we're getting back to our podcast, Love Isn't Enough. It's been on hiatus for a little bit as we got married and are getting some foundation of other parts of our business before getting back to that. So, any of those two websites would be the best resource. Or I'm on Instagram at Joree Rose as well.
Okay. Well, all that will be in the show notes. And thank you again for joining me. And let's do this again. I hope you will.
I would be happy to come on anytime, Lisa. Thank you so much for having me.
You betcha. Thank you. All right, everyone. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next time. Thank you for listening to Midlife Marriage Mastery. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow, rate, and share it with a friend who needs to hear this message today. Until next time, lead with love, live with purpose, and master the art of being together. Grab my free assessment called Midlife Marriage Check-In at lisanellercoaching.com.